First of all, good afternoon / early evening, everybody. Again, I'd like to thank all the organisers for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. So, as a rather wieldy title suggests, I'm going to cover briefly how I think research can play a key role in engaging diverse groups in outreach. And I'm really going to talk from experience rather than sort of anything in terms of broader research, and perhaps allude to some of the programs I've been involved in. So I'll put it into some sort of context in terms of my own career trajectory and research interests. And then we're going to talk about some real sort of outreach and public engagement initiatives and focus on relevant case studies that I've been involved in, which will hopefully give you a flavour of how, at least through my own experiences, I've been able to sort of utilise aspects of research which can really help to galvanise young people and from diverse groups. So, I suppose in terms of some of the key things, I'm currently a senior teaching fellow and head of outreach in the Faculty of Natural Sciences in physics. My undergrad was chemistry at Manchester, and I did a PhD. Well, basically I did chemistry and then asked why too many times and realised that it's actually physics is where the answer lies. So I ended up doing a PhD in physics. And then I've spent some time in industry as well as I went back as a postdoc, and we worked on a program that commercialised some of the research. So I ended up co-founding a technology business called Duvas Technologies, as well as I've said, spending several years as sort of in industry. To give you a more visual look of what happened, I don't mean the picture in the corner, I mean just, I actually meant the timeline. Okay, so that's where it started. My parents came to the UK in the 60s from Jamaica. My secondary school and so on was in Nottingham. And I suppose if I was to think how I was at school, I was always an inquisitive person, always asking questions, which not everybody appreciated, of course, but I think that is part of being a scientist, I suppose, or at least a budding scientist, having an inquisitive mind. But there was one particular instance. I wouldn't say I was particularly studious. I like to have a laugh and a joke like everybody else. But I was interested, I suppose, in sort of things generally. And there was a chemistry test at school. I was about 14. Oh, yes, the creaky floorboard, I forgot. There was a chemistry test. I was about 14, and it was just a straightforward test, nothing too big, but I managed to get top of the class, which was the first time I got top of the class in any subject, really. It was a real surprise, even to the teachers. But the funny thing is, what actually surprised me was the reaction of the boffins. You know, in the boffins, they're the ones who always get top marks, and they were really upset that I got top of the class, because they didn't expect someone like me to get top marks on this test. And one of them even asked the teacher if they could remark my work to make sure I definitely got top. So that sort of irked something in me to say, well, hold on a moment, why do you think you have a divine right to always be top when you've got a brain and so have I, and you can speak and so can I? And so I ended up sort of battling with them on, you know, every time there's a test, it's what did Mark get, what did such and such get, and so on, just to prove that actually, you know, you don't have a divine right to be top, anybody can be top. And it spilled over into other subjects and things like that. And that's kind of how I got into education, through sort of, I suppose it might have been the sort of rebellious Jamaican heritage or whatever, to say, no, we're not going to stand for this, you know, I'm going to sort of prove that I can be as good as you, if not better. In the end, you realise you're not really battling against them, you're just really pitching yourself against your own potential. But it was enough to sort of put me in a position where I did A-levels. Surprisingly, I didn't do A-level physics. That's one thing, probably partly why I get into outreach, because I really got put off the subjects at GCSE. I thought it was so boring. Just, you know, iron filings and magnets and batteries and things. It just didn't really feel like the subject that I know it now. So I did maths, chemistry and economics, and eventually decided to do a degree in chemistry because I thought it was more pragmatic. I could actually test things in science. And I remember saying to the economics teacher, who was very disappointed, he said, why didn't you do economics? I said, well, I can't just take £1 billion and inject it into the economy and see what happens. And that was my approach. I suppose in in a sense, I should have maybe aimed a bit higher and probably aspired to be a chancellor or something like that. In the end, once I did do chemistry, though, that's when I really got into the subject, and I really got into an area called spectroscopy, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, and I thought it was a fascinating area, and of course it's underpinned by quantum mechanics and so on. And you can see in the blue, basically the green means sort of industry type experiences, and the blue means education type experiences, if you like. So I actually worked for a couple of years for a company called Perkin-Elmer, who make spectrometers, and I thought that was going to be it. That was going to be me sort of for the rest of my career, if you like. But after 2 years, I realised that the career ladder is quite slow, or it was back then. Apparently it was the recession years. And apparently. And so I thought, well, actually, if I'd stayed on at university, maybe 3 years later, I would have had a PhD. And I noticed that in that company, the job that I actually wanted to do was the job by the product specialists, and they all had PhDs. So my plan was to go back, do a PhD, and then come back and virtually work for the same company if I could. Of course, life, all sorts of things happened along the way. And I ended up moving back to Nottingham because unfortunately my mum died towards the end of my PhD. So I moved back to Nottingham for family reasons, and there was no real demand for an atmospheric physicist at the time in Nottingham, so I had to turn my hand to other things. And that's when I got into finance and credit management and that sort of thing, and realised that actually a lot of the skills that you learn as a scientist, of course, they're extremely valuable in industry. And one particular experience at a software company which had quite a large turnover, I'd sort of put in my own sort of system to manage debt, in other words, manage the debt that other companies owe this particular company. And I became really efficient at collecting that debt in various ways. I almost treated it like a scientist. It was like a conveyor belt. I had the sort of the nearly collectibles, the not collectibles, and then the firm promises, and I sort of moved it like a conveyor belt sort of thing, but it was really effective. And then other things, like organising the debt ledger in terms of those who owe the most first. It sounds obvious and logical, but they were doing everything in alphabetical order. Didn't make sense to me. But the net result was the company's turnover for that particular year had increased from 24 million to 30 million a year, but their debt ledger had been reduced by 1 million. So of course the auditors couldn't understand that, because that doesn't make sense. Your turnover is increasing, but your debt is decreasing. They thought someone was fiddling the books, so they had to point to me, and I had to show them this system. But at the time, it made me realise that I actually was more like a scientist than a businessman. But I also recognised the value of what science can do. So in a funny kind of way, it started from an educational journey. And my mum always used to say that education is your passport out of poverty. And in a sense, I would say that having a STEM education is a key driver for social mobility, and that's part of what drove me to want to encourage more people, particularly like myself, to study subjects like physics at places like Imperial and elsewhere. And so that's how I got into outreach. I did lots of things in summer schools, working with the local community, trying to teach maths and science. And then as a researcher, as a postdoc, I started doing more and more research, because I realised the problem. When I was a PhD student, I sort of naively thought, well, okay, I'm sort of first generation immigrant, if you will, or second generation immigrant. Maybe I'm the first of a wave of Afro-Caribbeans who are going to be all over doing PhDs. I'm maybe the first. And then 10 years later, you realise there is no wave coming, and the problem stems much earlier on, like in the school. And so that's why I got involved in lots of schools outreach and so on. So just to sort of briefly touch on the research side and how I've used it to help in outreach. So as I said, my research was linked with air pollution, and there was a strong sort of correlation between transport activity and local air quality. And so there was a project which involved developing sensors. Some would be fixed on sort of street furniture, and some would be mounted on moving vehicles. And you'd create this network of sensors that would be collecting air quality data, pollution data, and then you'd develop the mapping capability. So you'd eventually develop real-time pollution maps, and that was the sort of aim of the research. And this was based on some simulated data, but the type of thing we wanted to show was, for example, what the potential impact would be for, say, the school run on the local pollution, and how you can use policy to sort of affect people's behaviour and improve air quality. And so one of the projects which we were involved in, which allowed us to do sort of take outreach a bit further, was the Brighton project. So we collaborated with the Brighton Council as well as Civitas, the European EU organisation, and some other contributors. And the idea was that there was the school grounds, the school playground if you like, and there was a main road right by the side of, there was 3 primary schools at the time. And we set up our units to monitor air pollution and air quality as vehicles passed by, as well as some ambient sort of sampling units within the school grounds. And then we'd have all this data feeding sort of in real time to the actual school themselves. And then we'd also deliver some programs to the school children so that they could understand the impact on their local environment. And also, as part of the deal, we then invited the students into Imperial, into one of our lab facilities, and they did some hands-on science on things like acids and bases and so on, and things that actually also is related to pollution. So the idea there is that even though it was research, and in fact we did find some interesting correlations, not surprisingly, between transport activity and local air quality, and we can't take full credit for headlines like these, but it was our research was in 2010, you'll notice. This was in 2016. But basically, the mayor, then mayor, has now recognised it is a problem that the location of schools near main roads, or at least very, very busy, congested London main roads, can have an impact on vulnerable groups like young school children. So again, that's an example where we've used outreach to inform young people, but they've actually also contributed in some small way to the research, which I think was quite useful. Another program I was involved in was something called Generating Genius. Now this was run by a charity called Generating Genius, and they had a cohort of Afro-Caribbean boys from inner city London, and they were quite young, probably about 12 or 13 at the time. And the idea was to have a longitudinal program over several years to sort of nurture them to sort of into STEM from an early age. And all they had to do really was be reasonable at their SATs, maybe level 4 at the time, so not the top marks, but reasonable at their SATs, and just show some example of where they have some natural interest in science of some way. So the selection criteria wasn't huge. And there they are in different guises. We set up a 3-week summer program. They did robotics, they did chemistry, but one of the more interesting strands was that we decided to develop our own module on malaria. And we had a malaria research group. We used real data from a village in Africa, but we had a fictitious panel that they had to present to and bid for money to solve this malaria problem from different perspectives. So they worked in teams, and they basically put together their bid, their PowerPoints. They also had to write a short 2-page research paper on how they're going to tackle it. And it was they were extremely impressive. I mean, that was an example of one of the papers they wrote. You probably can't read much, but they really set it out like a research paper, and they really got into it. That was the module they actually enjoyed the most, even though it didn't involve any actual practical hands-on activity, if that makes sense. And one of the reasons I think why they enjoyed it so much is because sometimes, whilst it's good to sort of see science, if you like, you get much more out of it if you can kind of get a feeling what it's like to be a scientist. And they really felt that they were actually sort of working towards solving something that they could at least relate to on some level. So again, another area of research. At Imperial, I suppose there are many different aspects in terms of outreach, in terms of student recruitment, if you like. We don't have an issue with the numbers per se, but we would like a more reflective balance of students, both internationally and locally. But one program which I helped set up was the Global Summer School, and this was really to attract international students from different parts of the world, if you like. The only reason I mention it, not so much is its outreach, because most of these students, they can sort of afford to pay to go on the program, so it's not in that sense. But in terms of the nature of the program, what they did in week 1, they were into sort of specific streams, if you like, physical sciences, and then engineering, and then there was a life science stream. So they worked in those areas of their own interest that they potentially want to go into. But then in the second week, they came together in, if you like, multidisciplinary teams and worked on innovation projects which were closely related to what our researchers were working on. So particular research teams would propose a particular problem that they're working on, and then each team would have a certain amount of time to work on it, come up with a solution and present. And so again, looking at the feedback, what they enjoyed was the fact that they felt that they were somehow contributing to some of the leading research or leading thinking at the time. And I think that is a real driver in terms of outreach when you're engaging with different groups. In a similar vein, we developed a work experience program, and I'm sure if there are many if there are academic staff members, you invariably get the odd emails from very good students saying, I'm really interested in doing some work experience in your department, here's my CV, and everything looks great, but you just don't have a mechanism to deal with it. And I got frustrated with that, so we set up a program in the department of specific time window where we took on a cohort of students. And again, part of it was to expose them to the department and physics and so on. But one of the things we did, we assigned a pair of students for a morning or an afternoon to a research group. And they would interview about half a dozen researchers right across the board, from PhD students all the way up to emeritus professors, and sort of interview them and understand what they do in their research and how it all fits in. And then they'd make a poster, a conference-style poster of that particular research group. So, and then they'd present it at the end of the week, effectively to their peers and possibly their parents and teachers. And so in the end, they end up informing each other about the various areas of research, but then they from their point of view, they learn some new physics which they wouldn't have learned at school. And at the same time, from a department point of view, it's not a health and safety risk having lots of young miners, in the labs and so on. So we were able to do that. That's an example of the sorts of posters that they would produce. This was for atmospheric physics. And again, in fact, two of those actually ended up as undergraduates. One of them's a fourth year undergraduate now. So it also works as a good recruitment tool as well. We also galvanise more applications from the schools and so on. I should say this scheme was so popular when we first opened it, because we were the only department to offer it at Imperial at the time. We had about 800 applications for about 40 places at the time. Luckily, we have more departments offering it, so we're down to about 300 applications, but only for 20 places. The point being, really, is that we didn't feel right about, of those 800, you're going to reject 700 and odd, and we had a lot of, female applicants, and we just didn't want to just reject them without offering something. So we created an open day specifically for women as a result, and now it's an annual event in any event. And this was where we had Nadine Cox, who's from JPL, one of the lead engineers on the Mars rover, and that's one of our theoretical physicists, Faye Dowker. But again, they're very popular, and I think it is important to expose young people to role models that they can maybe relate to. That is also something that helps to dispel myths, as was said. We've also had teachers' workshops. Again, part of the nature of the workshop, this was for teachers who teach, in this case, physics, but maybe don't have a physics degree. And so sometimes it's important for a teacher to instill the passion of the subject to the student. But if you're not that passionate yourself as a teacher, it's hard for a student to then be enthused. So we invite them in once a year, or a cohort of teachers, and they undergo different activities. But it starts off with a lecture from one of our staff, sort of esteemed researchers on the current research in the department, covering different areas, to give them an idea, a flavour of physics as a living subject, rather than just something that is taught to pass an exam. So that they can hopefully be more inspired, as well as getting other tips around sort of teaching, so physics on the web, practical tips, and then we finish with a roundtable discussion. And then I think one of the other things I want to mention is that you can also, undergraduates are also very good at contributing to outreach initiatives. So we set up something called Accelerate into Maths and Science, and basically it's about showing how maths is more intertwined with science than you might really see at A-level. For example, A-level physics doesn't really have any calculus in it, so it's that sort of thing. And the point is here, these were the students, but you probably wouldn't have realised that he was actually the tutor who was an undergraduate. And that's really my point again, that it's not, you're never too old or too young to mentor others. There's always something you can share, even if you're just 1 or 2 years ahead than the rest. There's always a lot that can be shared. One thing I also want to mention, Maggie Pocock, you may have seen her before. She's an alumni from our department, a great science communicator. Her hero when she was growing up was the guy on the left, Charles Bolden, who is he was a former astronaut and then became the head of NASA. And we had managed to put on a program where Charles Bolden gave a talk about all the various research in NASA that was going on to about 350 school children. And also Maggie gave a talk, and so again, she sort of fulfilled her dream of meeting Charles. And then the other thing I should mention, again, this guy, Emmanuel, ended up becoming, from that day, he ended up becoming convinced that he wanted to go to Imperial, and he's now finishing his chemistry degree. So again, these things do have an impact. Sometimes with these initiatives, you can't always know the direct impact, but the reality is that it is having an impact, and once we do reach a sort of critical mass of people, then I think we can really sort of start to see the real benefits of all the efforts. So I think I'll sort of summarize by just I suppose, pointing towards aspiration and preparation. Some initiatives really are developed to aspire. So, science is cool, that sort of thing. But whilst you can, someone can aspire to be an astronaut or an engineer or a scientist, we can't forget the fact that they still need to be prepared. So we never lose sight of the preparation. So I like to try and develop some initiatives that will help to prepare the students as well as sort of inspire them so that they get real tools which will be useful. And hopefully I've shown how scientific research, albeit very briefly, wherever I can, I try and incorporate elements of leading or recent research in order to inspire young people, because I think when they feel that it's not quite the same as school, and that it helps to develop a more natural interest in the subject. And also, I think, from our research, young people are often attracted into STEM because of the research and the innovation that happens. So I think I'll leave it there, and thanks for your time.